We have to do more with less. We don't have the resources to continue on the same path we're going down right now. I hear over and over, don't consolidate and close schools. If there's a better option, we need to know.
That's Seattle Public Schools Superintendent Brent Jones laying out a big if. If there's a better option than consolidation, he wants to know, because now he has delayed the announcement to put out a list of 20 elementary schools that may close next year. But he is releasing a list of new public safety measures following a deadly shooting at Garfield High School, so plenty to unpack there. Plus, should Seattle continue to fund the We Deliver Care program and its response to street disorder? And will we see a social housing measure on the ballot sometime soon? We got a lot of questions, hoping to provide some answers this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are mine, and I am joined by my effervescent co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I was trying to explain to a non-Seattleite what the first sign of summer truly is here in the Pacific Northwest. Some would say wait until July 5th, but I was trying to provide a little more context here. Is it, it's summer in Seattle when we get the first fecal bacteria warnings at Lake Washington, when people stop putting clothing on their pets? What do you think? It's summer in Seattle when?
I don't know. I'm never entirely convinced it's summer in Seattle. I thought it was like a month ago, but now it's cloudy today. Yeah, I think July 5th really is the day.
Yeah, you really have to look at it that way, isn't it? Well, thank you, David, as always, for joining me here. And thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of City Hall. A special thanks to the patrons who keep the show going. We're going to answer one of our patrons' questions today, so make sure you stick around for that. That's the deal for patrons, folks. We answer their questions on the show. We send them a cool Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. We also set them up with patrons first content before anybody else, and each week we tell them how wonderful they are. So how about that? Find the podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews, and offer your support if you can. A big thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get her going. Time for Right Here, Right Now. A quick check-in on Seattle City Council action this week. The measure we talked about last week on the podcast, a crackdown on street racing with a $500 fine. That made it through the Public Safety Committee on Tuesday. Should come to the full council soon. Hellcats beware. We'll keep track of that. We're also learning about a hike in utility rates this week, about 4.7% over the next 6 years, meaning 4.7% each year. That's being discussed at the committee level, too. But what we are not hearing this week, want to focus on this, the highly anticipated list of 20 schools that could potentially be closed in the fall of 2025 here in Seattle. The school district had said we would hear about this in late June. Now it looks like we'll hear about it maybe in September. So, David, the district says the reason for the delay is they're trying to work on this plan. They're trying to get more of the feedback they've received over the past few months really incorporated into this plan. That sounds positive, but then again, I'm thinking state law says the district would actually have to hold public meetings at every site it's planning to close. So if we get a list this September, and then the school board is supposed to have a decision by the end of the year, and we have all these public hearings that have to happen, the schedule sounds a little bit compressed, to say the least. I just wanted your take on the district's decision to delay releasing this list. What does it mean? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I don't have any sort of inside reporting on this. Not my area of focus, but I know that the reaction to the announcement was very strong. I would hope that they would have expected it would be a very strong reaction because people have a connection to their school, of course. And but it has the feeling of sort of what we've seen a few times, which is something's introduced, it gets enormous pushback, they delay, they expand the process. So, I guess I'm surprised if they were surprised by that reaction. Like I said, I think that was probably predictable. And if they're delaying it as a result, maybe in retrospect, they should have just set this timeline in the first place. But, my sense is that people are feeling really uneasy because they've announced this plan to close schools, but haven't said which ones.
Yep.
And that is kind of an interesting place to be in because everyone is nervous. It's not, it's not like people can sort of start mentally preparing. They're just kind of in limbo here.
Right. It's going to affect every school, even if it isn't your family school that shuts down. Your
Right.
school is probably going to be consolidated with another. So, yeah, you're right. It's going to affect everybody.
Yeah.
And just to jump back on this, folks, as a catch-up maneuver here, the district is dealing with a $129 million budget deficit. Enrollment has been dropping. Schools get money from the state on a per-pupil basis, so there we go there. SPS says it has 29 schools with fewer than 300 kids, leading to possibly an inequitable distribution of resources, especially to kids with special needs. And 85% of the district's budget equals staff. And David, this is the part that I'm not hearing so much about. Fewer schools is going to save some money, but not $129 million. I've heard that from the district. To really make a dent in the budget, it feels like we're going to have to see a reduction in staff or a major overhaul in the way our schools get funding from the state. I guess I'm seeing, and I wanted to ask you this, do you anticipate some school layoffs on the horizon? What do you think?
It's hard to do the math without it. Because again, I mean, I think that is another chief concerns of people, which is, okay, we're going to go through the really dramatic and disrupting step of closing schools, but it's not actually going to totally solve the problem. So what comes next? And like you said, I mean, the clear one is layoffs, which is also going to be disruptive and to folks. So yeah, I haven't heard any other sort of alternative theories of the case other than, the kind of more progressive push is more money from the state legislature. And, I suppose that's possible. It is a long session. Do I get that right? Yeah. This year's
you got it in terms of budget coming up. Mm-hmm.
This is a long budget session. I think.
But that's not till January. I mean, you can't wait around that long, it feels like.
No, yeah, you can't plan on that. So I suppose maybe the school district just keeps pushing forward on this, and then maybe there's a last minute save or whatever it might be from the legislature. I think the capital gains tax initiative really complicates that. If that passes, or rather if the tax is repealed, I think that's a lot of funding for specifically special education. But so, I mean, it's a little different, but it's all kind of in the same ecosystem there. I suppose there's some politics that could happen in the Olympia and at the state level. But like you said, this is a long process that will take a lot of outreach. So it's the school district can't hope or bank on that.
No, absolutely not. That's been a solution for so many different school districts around the state that really hasn't formalized or come together at the state level over the past several years. Thanks for jumping in on that, David. I did want to talk about what the superintendent did release this week, some new information about public safety measures that SPS is planning to implement this fall, so in September. This coming from a note set out to all school families there. The superintendent says SPS is expanding its plans to include gun violence prevention in high schools and increased mental health support for all grades. There's also a $2 million investment planned to improve school building exteriors and improve campus security. He also mentions conversations over the summer that will be happening to potentially have neighborhood safety patrols around school buildings, possibly requiring ID badges on campus, clear backpacks, maybe even closing campuses for lunch. And David, I know we touched on this last week when the mayor was talking about some new investments he wants to make at the city level in mental health programs for teens. What's your take on what the superintendent is proposing here when it comes to public safety?
I mean, it's a change. These public safety measures are always difficult because, on the one hand, it's not great to have this sort of security state feel in schools. Yeah. That's not always conducive to the most kind of relaxed learning environment. And
sure,
there are some concerns about having additional security or whatever it might be in schools, but at the same time, I think probably the calls from parents, especially in the aftermath of the Garfield High School situation, are probably greater than whatever those concerns might be. And so I think this is reacting to that. I think public safety and the general sort of unease about safety at schools with the presence of guns in communities. And I think that is all beginning to outweigh sort of whatever other kind of concerns about creating too much of a security state in schools might be.
Yeah. And I guess I just wanted to talk about this, the timing of these public safety announcements up against this larger discussion of closing schools and what this tells us about the Seattle public schools here. There had been some downtimes for this district before in 2008, as I recall, and I went through this with my family. There were some school closures too. I remember that. But what does this double dose of challenging news do for the future of the district? Because I have to say, unfortunately, when we're talking about public safety as much, when we're talking about these school closures as much, it really doesn't make Seattle schools a more attractive option for families when they're really hurting for kids. That per pupil funding is a big issue here. Some thoughts about what this means for the future of Seattle schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of see this sometimes in business, certainly in journalism, where we try and cut your way to profitability, but then in so doing, you're kind of making your product worse and therefore making it less attractive. And the concern is, I think the term for downtowns was like a doom spiral or whatever it might be. But
right.
I think there is there should be some concern about exponential decline, which is by trying to wrap your arms around one issue, budget issues and security, then you're kind of exacerbating the problem that got you there in the first place, and then it sort of hits the reset button. So at the same time, like I said, I don't know exactly what the alternatives are unless the state legislature decides they want to step in.
Yeah, it's going to be such an interesting next couple months here for the Seattle School District and really what happens in Olympia, too. So thanks for breaking that down with me, David. All right, moving on here. Should Seattle continue to fund the We Deliver Care program, an outreach project with a non-police approach to street disorder on 3rd Avenue? How successful have they been? What does the data tell us? We're talking about that next on Now Hear This. Shout out to the Capitol Hill blog for bringing this story to my attention here. Cap Hill looking at a street ambassador program. This while the Seattle City Council, in its Housing and Human Service Committee, is looking at a similar program with the We Deliver Care company this week. Now, WDC, as it's known, specializes in nonviolent de-escalation with ambassadors on the street. They received funding through the City of Seattle's 3rd Avenue project. Now, that funding, as I'm seeing it in the materials that the council is looking at this week, that funding runs out at the end of September. So WDC is looking for $640,000 through a supplemental budget request, and it has a request for $2.6 million for next year as well. As one of the group's ambassadors told me on Seattle Channel a year ago, the WDC is doing some critical work.
We've saved over 70 lives down here. People come grab us when somebody's overdosing because they're used to seeing us. We're down here 16 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So this group is out on the street 7 days a week, but I want to look at some of the other data We Deliver Care is showing the City Council this week. From January of 2023 to May of this year, WDC says it's made 116 housing referrals, with more than 50 people moving into permanent housing. WDC has also administered Narcan, 151 overdose reversals, 261 de-escalations of potentially violent situations, even helped link 29 people up with employment. David, we've got this group. It's focused on 3rd Avenue. It's looking for more funding this year and next. Just getting down to the brass tacks of this, do you see them getting more support from the council with this looming $240 million budget deficit we keep talking about?
I don't know, and like you said, I mean, this is a little new to me. Also, I'm still trying to learn more about this organization. I mean, I think it's an area that the city council cares about, obviously, but at the same time, I think this council particular, and I would say Council President Nelson, bring maybe a little more skepticism towards some of these efforts. Because there's a lot of crossover here with like LEAD and co-lead, and I know that members of the city council have, raised some questions about how effective they think that is.
Sure.
The fact of there being the budget deficit certainly doesn't help their case. But, we're also talking about 3rd Avenue here, and pulling back from 3rd Avenue right now.
Doesn't seem like a good look. Yeah.
Right. Because, I mean, I think a lot of times when people are talking about public safety or disorder downtown, they're really specifically talking about 3rd Avenue. So, I don't know where this goes.
Yeah. This one's really interesting. There was one direction that the Capitol Hill blog went on this one, David, bringing up this idea that the council's new deal with the police union, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, SPOG, not only includes this big bump in pay for officers, but also the possibility to transition more, quote, police work, as you might call it, to civilian organizations like We Deliver Care, this patrol type of concept here. Would that be a way for the city to justify an expense like this as kind of, yes, we're investing in public safety, we've got this non-police option, and SPOG has allowed us to do that? I was trying to figure out what thoughts that engenders in your head.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a pitch for, a kind of compromise pitch, which is, hey, the Seattle Police Department is overstretched, and also, we believe that there are certain things that are better suited for non-police officers. So, hey, this is kind of a win-win situation. We free up officers for other tasks. while taking on some of these tasks that eat up a lot of time, which is responding to crisis and sort of public disorder. I don't know exactly how SPOG fits into this. You never know exactly what they want to give up. But the new contract does allow for more kind of civilian response to certain things. So I don't know if there's any kind of intersection or crossover between those two things in this.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this fits. And I appreciate the Capitol Hill blog bringing it up, because I think it is something that the city has to be looking at, because the recent reports we're seeing, Como actually put this out this week, those numbers for the police department, despite this higher pay, et cetera, they're not going up. It looks like the officers that Seattle PD does have, it's going to have fewer at the end of this year than it did at the start. So that trend, unfortunately, is continuing in that direction for the SPD. I did want to switch gears with you, David, and talk about a piece you recently wrote in the Seattle Times about a vote to fund Seattle's social housing program. So Seattleites voted yes to establish a new public development authority for social housing last year. This is housing meant for people of many income levels, and importantly, up to 120% of the area median income. The concept is those higher income folks help subsidize the lower income people in these buildings when the system is up and running. So this group, House Our Neighbors, has collected more than 37,000 signatures, sent them to King County elections. They need about 26,500 of those to be valid. And this measure would tax businesses in Seattle with employees earning more than $1 million per year. So let's get to the timeline here first, David. Here, it's looking like this has a shot to be on the ballot, but now the question is when? What happens next here?
So then the signatures need to be verified. They have a pretty solid buffer, so I would be surprised if it didn't ultimately get verified. And then it goes to the city council, who will vote to. They can either enact the measure outright, which they won't do, because most of the city council people are not going to sign off on. This is new taxation on businesses. They've been pretty explicit that they don't want to do that. So I'm sure they will not enact it outright. And so then they can choose, they vote to put it on the ballot, or they can choose to vote to put it on ballot and then add a competing proposal
measure
on the ballot also. I don't know if they'll be organized to do that, or what a competing proposal would look like in this case. The real question is how long they take to actually take that vote. I think they would need to vote before the primary for it to be on the November ballot. I wouldn't rule out some sort of political calculation by the city council, because again, I think ultimately this is a measure that most of them will probably not support, because it's, I certainly know that the chamber and the kind of business community really doesn't support it. And so I think the real question is whether it shows up on the November ballot or the February ballot.
Right.
But, that said, the previous measure to establish the housing developer was on the February ballot and still passed.
53% of the vote there, sure.
This time around, though, there's, at that time, there was not any kind of organized opposition to it, because it was really just setting up a structure. It didn't include any funding. This one is going to have some organized opposition. I'm sure the chamber will fight it. And so, I think it actually has the makings of trappings of a real political fight. And I think which ballot, be it November or February, it's on, could actually make a difference.
Maybe there's going to be more oxygen in February for a debate like this over a local issue. But I did want to talk about this when it comes to a funding measure like this. And you mentioned that point that there wasn't much pushback at all last time around when this measure went through last year. And I did want to make sure I put the aside there. This funding mechanism was not included in the original bill because of the one subject only limitation in our state when it comes to initiatives. But David, let's dive into this. In terms of the opposition coming for this measure here potentially, it sounds like the chamber has some questions. Is it just too many taxes are getting piled on businesses, et cetera, or what's the rationale there?
Yeah, I think there's that. It's the sort of, hey, we're still pulling ourselves out of the pandemic. This is not the time to be taxing more businesses, even those that have employees that are making over $1 million. And then, the other argument is basically that this housing developer is not ready for it. We had written about it a bit before, which is they were just way behind schedule on hiring a CEO and paying off debts and paying their board members, which the charter requires. The people on the housing development board say basically the state and the city were dragging their feet on releasing funds for us, so there was no way we could get it going. But now the money's flowing, so we're getting into a better groove here. But I think that is part of the concern too, is that this money is going to start coming in, and it's not going to, the housing developer isn't going to be ready to get it out the door. Housing developer folks push back on that, say that's not true, but that is kind of how the fight is going to break down.
Wow, that's going to be a really interesting struggle there. And I think voting for something like this, and I know we've talked about this before, Seattleites like to vote yes on a lot of different things. When there's a dollar figure attached to it more specifically, though, I wonder how that adds to the calculus here in terms of would you like to vote for this type of housing? And then when you attach dollar figures to it, I just wonder where that goes. Do you have any thoughts on that, how the Seattle electorate would respond to something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a vacuum, you'd have to think they would respond decently well, because the pitch is basically, these companies can afford to pay at least one person, maybe several, over $1 million.
Yeah.
So they're clearly doing okay.
Yeah.
It's not a tax on total income. It's just anything that they pay over $1 million. So if they want to not pay the tax, they could pay their employees $999,000.
Sure.
So, the basic, you can hear the basic pitch, which is tax the rich to build housing. And I think for the most part, Seattle voters would like that pitch. The thing is, other sort of tax proposals that have been on the ballot lately, I'm thinking, the city levies in particular, have not had any kind of formal opposition. There has not been any sort of campaign to convince people of the faults of those things.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of the last time there was formal opposition, probably before Fake Arnault died, who was the kind of main funder of opposition to these property tax levies. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when there is organized and well-funded pushback on it, and to see how that changes. Yeah. And 53% to establish the board in the first place, that's not a huge margin. And so now we're getting into dollars and cents and talking about taxes. And the city council was recently elected, and a lot of them ran on we're gonna spend the money we have, we're gonna get our house in order, we're not gonna ask for more taxes. And clearly that resonated because they all got elected. So it's hard to say exactly. I think for me it all comes down to how big and well-funded of an opposition there ends up being to this.
We shall see. Thank you for that, David. And talking about spending money, guess what? We had a question come in from one of our patrons about how and where our local governments spend their dollars. A very topical question when you consider the budget battle in progress here in Seattle. That's coming up next on You Ask, We Answer. A shout out to show patron Rob, intern Rob, throwing us this question this week. And if you'd like to ask a question, folks, become a patron and send something our way at seattlenewsviewsandbrews@gmail.com. Spell it all out there. We'd love to answer what you have to ask us. So here's Rob's question. We hear a lot about plans for the future with the Seattle and King County governments. We hear campaign promises, budget proposals, and about legislative debates, and we consider options for our future. But what about a comprehensive list of the services we are receiving today? Do our local governments publish a list of services provided for past fiscal years? Ideally, itemized to the dollar. If we spend $1, what do we get for that dollar? If yes, how is that information confirmed? Is that information discovered via regular audits of departments? Are regular progress reports published? Are there any departments which have never been audited or have never published results of their work publicly? Rob, this is actually a lot of questions, and I'm doing my best here. Also, if yes, how is the media reported on these details to the public? And do you think they have done an adequate job of reporting what we get for our pooled dollars? Rob, a ton to unpack there. Here's where I'm going to go first. I want to guide you to the City of Seattle's Open Budget Portal. Enter the wonkiness there, Rob, if you would. Put Seattle Open Budget Portal into your search engine. You will find a breakdown of the split between operating budget, meaning ongoing services, and capital budget, or one-time investments in infrastructure and improvement projects. This is a really cool tool. It shows how those dollars are spent. The different departments are all public with their spending. You can absolutely see it there. I will also recommend putting into your search engine Converge Media Budget School. My good friend and former co-host Kevin Schofield broke down the nuts and bolts of Seattle's budget process beautifully with Amari Salisbury from Converge about a year or so ago. But I want to move to this question about audits, because I think this is where the action is. A lot of chatter about this during last year's council races and this year's too. As I've covered local government, this whole concept of an audit usually comes when an elected official sees a problem and asks for an audit. You might remember last year, Councilmember Strauss asked for an audit of the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, try to figure out where SDCI could improve its structure to move permits through more quickly. The audit ended up finding a whole lot more, including some ethics and equity concerns about which projects were getting approved more quickly, etc. So audits do happen, but most often when they are requested by a local official. And David, I did want your thoughts on this whole audit concept, I should say. We've seen it unfold over the last few months with the council. It's easier said than done to make an audit happen on something like the budget, which isn't to say it shouldn't be done, but are more audits the answer when it comes to creating a more effective local government? I know it's a broad question, but I wanted to throw it at you.
I mean, yeah, I think audits play an important role, and they are used pretty freely. And there are several levels of auditing. There's the city auditor, and there's the state has been
called in. Yeah,
the state does financial audits too. I mean, the state might get called in for kind of specific things, but also does semi-regular kind of looks at the financial state of governments in Seattle. There's a lot of talk about auditing the budget on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
The document that was produced was not a literal audit because an audit takes a long time. It costs a lot of money to really go through, but the city did kind of go through and do a close look at its budget. Perhaps a review would be better than the term audit. So, yeah, I mean, they do play a role. I just think the restriction mostly on them is that they're costly and timely and require a lot of staff. So the city auditor's office is a small branch. I don't know exactly how many employees there are, but it can't be too many more than like 10 or so.
Right.
And so, they're balancing their time between pieces that they feel like they want to take a look at and then requests from city council people. So, there is a structure for auditing. I think, sure, it could always be done more so. But at the same time, it's not an audit, but there is a review every year of the budget, which is during the budget season. The city council spends several months getting briefings from central staff, sort of going through the department budgets. Each department staff has to come to the city council and explain exactly why they have put what they have in their budget. So, it's not like this stuff unfolds in the dark. It's just, you don't always get like perhaps a single document that explains all of it. But for the motivated, the information is there and is aired quite publicly once a year or every year.
Yeah. I guess this other question about the local media doing enough to break down how our governments are spending money, I guess I'll say that never enough, Rob. We definitely need more of that type of a thing. But I just remember this from my time in commercial TV news. When there's a big budget issue, the local news world is all over it. But beyond that, there are a lot of other issues to focus on. And I just wanted your thoughts on that, David. Does local media do enough to really break down how our governments are spending their money? What do you think?
Yeah, probably not. But there are lots of things that the local media probably doesn't do enough on. We are not auditors. We also have to present these things in a way that are readable and digestible for kind of the general public.
Right.
We try to do that. I'm sure we could do more. So, probably not. But I think, I think, again, this isn't quite as shrouded in secrecy as I think some people might think, that the information is out there and available. Whether or not we are constantly apprising the public about that information, I'm sure we could do more. We will do more come the fall when the budget is really kind of front and center.
Fair enough. Thank you, David, for that breakdown there, and thank you very much, Rob, for that question. Always a joy to break it down, and always a joy to hear from you there. But we do need to wrap things up, David. I did want to bring this up. A tough road trip in progress for the Mariners as we record this show. But I saw you post on this. It might be a little tough to watch, but maybe it's just the M's way of saying, we really miss you fans at home. Is that how you try to assuage yourself on this?
Yeah, exactly. I just take comfort in knowing they'd rather be home in Seattle playing than on the road, and they are letting us know that by being really bad on the road.
Do they have to be that bad, though? We'll see how this goes.
I would settle for 500 on the road would be great.
Yeah, that's how teams win it, for sure. Yeah. So we'll see when they come back. And David, thank you as always for joining me here. Thanks to everybody who is listening to this episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to our patrons who support the show. Thanks a lot, patron Rob, for your question here. If you want to be a patron, find this podcast on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. And if you listen, once again, please do consider supporting the show as a patron. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.